our policy meeting from here. It's a very big room with not a lot of people in it, so I hope we can work together to try to make it feel like a more intimate space, and I just appreciate everybody working on that together. We'll do just a quick round of intros. Maybe we can start with Stephanie, if that's all right.
Hello, Stephanie Scott, Assistant General Counsel.
Dan Hoying, General Counsel.
There it is. Jim Crossett, board member.
Ben Lindy, board member.
Kendra Matt, board member.
Okay, so we'll get moving here. We've got a nice agenda for today, and this is our second to last policy committee meeting for the year. So that we just have this meeting and then one more with this group of people, and then maybe the same or maybe different. I'm starting in January. We're going to turn over to Council's office to do the first part of our standing agenda, which is the 3-year policy review.
Thank you. We have a few policies to present this morning. Let me bring up the agenda. We are closing in on the last few policies from the 4000 series. Those relate to classified employees that we are carrying over into the 3000 series to make one set of policies for our employees. The first one we have for you today is 3362.01 and 4362.01, which is threatening behavior toward employees. These policies are identical in both the classified and professional staff, so our recommendation is to rescind 4362.01 and just maintain the 3000 policy and have that apply to all employees. So glad to answer any questions, but that's our first recommendation.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions, Jim or Kendra? It's pretty straightforward. Seems okay. Any concerns with us putting this through in a consent agenda next at council's office, timing, whenever that is? Okay, we'll keep moving.
Thanks. Our second policy is 3430.02 and 4430.02. Both these policies relate to leave of absence for employment by a community school, and I also included a copy of the Ohio Revised Code on that, just so if anyone was looking for why this policy is a part of our policies. It is the law in Ohio that every board is supposed to have a policy that provides allowance for employees to take a leave to work for up to 3 years at a community school. Really no cost to CPS, it's just that they have that ability and that right. The policies are identical except with references to professional employees, so our recommendation would be to rescind 4430.02, maintain 3430.02, and we've suggested some red line to generalize that policy to apply to all employees. Glad to answer any questions.
Thanks, Dan. And this is the same. We're just merging the two series. There's zero substantive change. This is just, we're going to have fewer policies, and that makes everybody happy.
Correct. And also, I think, modernizes them to the extent that we have one set of policies that apply to our employees instead of this distinction between classified and professional.
Any questions or concerns from Jim, Kendra?
No, I think you pretty much answered the status in terms of employee. I can't believe what policy that was aligning with, but I know we had discussion around like the certificated employee status. So we're just making it cohesive, correct?
That's exactly right.
Okay. And then the other thing, just clarification around the law. So this is saying that employees are able to take a leave of absence and maybe work at a charter school or a startup school. That's what that's saying?
It's exactly what it says. And similar to the laws that apply to facilities, that when we sell a school property, we're required to offer it to charter schools. I have a sense that at some point, charter schools were having a hard time finding employees, and so they passed this law to essentially allow public school employees to take a leave to go work at a charter school.
Okay. Thank you for the clarity around that.
Yep.
Any concerns with us including this in an upcoming consent agenda for the policy modernization process? See
No
thumbs up from
concerns.
Jim, good from Kendra. All right, we'll keep moving.
Okay, thanks. Our next two are actually just returning items. One is professional development and licensure. In proposing this it was discussed in policy, I think, one meeting ago, was moved to the full board. Shortly before that, got some feedback from the teachers union saying that language that we had taken out, again, just to try to merge these policies relating to the local professional development committee is state law. Acknowledge that, but they would have liked to see it retained in our board policy. So we moved that language back in. And I got word from the union earlier this week that the changes, the revisions that we made, I think are acceptable to the union at this point. So glad to have the additional feedback and make these policies as good as possible. And with that change, recommend moving this forward.
That's great. Any questions from board members, Jim or Kendra?
Nope, you already outlined for us that the unions are in agreement with what is written, so I think that it's good to move forward.
I know we have Karen here in our audience. People on the screen can't see her, but is all of this is accurate?
Okay.
She's waving madly and saying, no, this is, no, I'm just kidding.
Okay, Dan's joking, but I think we're good. Any other, so we'll put this through in the same, and I think this to me, Kendra and Jim, feels like consent agenda friendly, not like a item separate on its own, but I really don't have it. If people feel differently, we could list it separately.
Can we defer to Karen and ask if that's possible? Are you okay with this being on the consent agenda, or would you recommend this being a standalone? Okay.
Yeah, anything to make these meetings slightly shorter would be lovely. Okay, great. Next item.
Yes, this is truly just a clerical item. I had included a version of the dress and grooming policy that excluded important language that was added at a previous policy committee meeting. That language has been added back in relating to consistent with the district wellness policy, dress and grooming procedures for students should embrace students from different cultures, students with different body types and economic circumstances in a welcoming and non-judgmental way. That language has been added back in, and with that, recommend moving it forward to the full board.
That's great. And just so I'm clear, this was the same language we talked about before.
Yes,
We just had
was-
a version control issue in what got posted. Right?
I posted a previous version of the policy that, and was glad to be corrected on that.
Lots going on, easy to fix. A question? Go ahead, Kendra.
Can I ask for just one additional thing? And I know it's something that we discussed, and Stephanie had called this out at a previous meeting, but if we can just include a statement or a sentence stating that this is also in alignment with the student code of conduct, some language around that. I don't think we would need to bring that back to the committee if you all are okay with it, but just maybe that last sentence to say that this is also in conjunction with the student code of conduct.
Glad to do that if that's the committee. Yep.
Jim, any?
I agree.
All right. Great. No concerns with me.
Yeah, so just the first paragraph of the policy says the dress code or requirement for school uniforms shall be incorporated into the student handbook and discipline plan. And
Okay.
you want to add there the student code of conduct?
Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, if I'm going too fast, I apologize. We can slow down. Y'all ready? I think it's your last one.
The last policy we have was asked to be reviewed, I think by the full board assigned this to us. Don't know if you want to do that here or later in the meeting, but it's the use of district facilities and property policy.
Yeah, I do want to do this today. Let's stick it in the section on topics submitted by board member, or maybe, I guess it's probably one of these flex items that we wanted to leave time for, so we'll hit it at the end. But I do want to make sure we get some time for it today. This was about what does our policy say about groups outside CPS that want to rent facilities, often sports fields, but I guess not limited to sports fields. Is that right? Yeah, okay. And is it okay, Kendra, Jim, if we do that, but then stick that at the other relevant part of the agenda?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go then, and for folks who have been following along the last couple of meetings, we've been trying to put in place kind of a standard structure for our meetings where at the top, for the first 20 minutes or so, we work through items that come from council's office on a timing such that every 3 years, the policy committee makes its way through 100% of the CPS policies. So that's what we just finished. We then have here this longer section where we've been keeping track of topics that board members have asked the policy committee to look into. About 2 meetings ago, we reviewed and approved a schedule for the rest of the year. That's also posted on board docs. It was there for last committee. It's there again, I think, for this committee. And if anybody wants to see kind of how we're doing, I kept on here a section, things we have started but haven't finished yet. I'm sure there are some mistakes I made. And then also what we had scheduled for the November meeting here. And I think just big picture, I had a chance to connect with Eve about the 2 things that she has in section 3B. But both seem good, both seem reasonably short, I think 5-10 minutes. Kareem and I were trading some texts. I actually just got a call from her in the meeting about some of her items, but she said she's she just completely understands if we don't get to them today, and I think I'll just carry them over into our next meeting so that we hit them next time. I think, Jim, I couldn't remember if we finished everything on Innovation Council that we needed in the last business meeting. I just put it on here in case there was something we needed to talk about.
All we had to do is add the information about having 2 parents as members of the committee, and Dan has provided an updated copy of that.
Okay.
I've got copies for you guys right here if you want to look at it.
No, that's great. And I think what I'm trying to do is if there are.
It was the only thing that changed, and it was a pretty simple change, so.
So we put this forward for approval at the next meeting.
Sure.
And I think we've talked about it pretty extensively. Are you okay with it going in the consent agenda?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just clarity. So again, this is just an administrative, this is at the administrative level, right? So any, I guess, ideas or, thoughts around innovation, this would be something that would be at the administrative level, but anything on a grander level would have to be approved by the board. So we're
Correct.
talking, okay.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct. Yep.
And is there, I think there is language, I couldn't remember. Is there language in here that specifies that?
Well, I think in item 5 would be the closest, maybe. We could add a sentence there that says, Kendra, you might have the right words, but we could add a sentence to say, any idea that's submitted that has to deal with the overall strategy of the district needs to go to the board,
Yeah.
something like that.
Okay.
You got that, Dan?
I think that would be good. And then just the last thing, I know we talked about principals, teachers, students. If we could just add maybe like 2 community members or stakeholders in there as well.
I think we're adding 2 parents,
Okay.
and I think that's enough. It starts to get to be a pretty big committee at that point. So I think it's all right for community members to submit ideas. But you're starting to have about 20 people. That gets to be a pretty big group.
I get you. I understand. I do think that maybe at least a community member, because it offers different perspective as well. So, and different thought processes around, how we can really generate ideas around the Innovation Council. And so it doesn't have to be a lot, but I do think that at least a community member, right, could be helpful as well, just to have that diversity in thought.
Okay.
And also to ensure that we're kind of representing all stakeholders or constituents.
Okay.
And that's my last feedback in terms of,
So,
just looking at the
let's see, we've got
proposal.
members appointed by the superintendent, members appointed by the treasurer. So the community member would be appointed by somebody from the board?
I happen to like that because the board's supposed to represent the community.
Yeah.
It
I
evens it
like
out.
the stakeholder idea. I think that's
I
fine.
hear your point on size too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
it's
really
just
do.
getting worried about size.
Yeah.
But maybe that would be somebody appointed by the
That's
board?
fine.
By the board? Okay, one community member.
Does that get us everything on Innovation Council we need? And we'll
so.
put that through next time. Any questions from council?
Yeah, I watched at the end of last board meeting, I rewatched that. This is going to be passed as a directive to the administration or as a board policy? It can be either. I would prep it into the sort of format that we typically use for board policies, if that's the preference.
I defer to my fellow board members who have more experience.
I think for our last meeting, it was a directive to the administration. That's what I recall.
I think it's fine. I happened, in theory, policy lasts longer. And if we're genuinely okay with either version, I think it's wonderful to have a dry run where it's not written in policy. We'll probably learn some things. And then we could always add it to policy and incorporate what we learn. I would like to try it. I'd like to make sure it happens. I don't want it to fall by the wayside. And if people are worried about that, I'm fine to put it through as a policy. I was just thinking about opportunities for learning.
Sure, sounds good. Okay.
And we'd still have next year with Mr. Crossett on the board to make sure it gets in policy. So like we have a little time.
There we go.
Yeah, unless we've scared him off already. Okay, great. So where my head was is I was trying to just help size. There are a lot of items listed here in section 3. I actually don't think there's too much content because some are quick, some are postponed, some we've taken care of. The superintendent eval policy, there's a bunch of stuff to work through. We can go there next. Okay, so here's what I tried to do. And let's see. Before we go to the document, I first want to thank some people. I really appreciate a number of people who are not in this room, but are other board members who have shared feedback on this policy at multiple points in the process. In addition to the emails and the written feedback that I shared at our last meeting, I also had a nice phone call with Eve yesterday, trying to prepare for this meeting. I really appreciate some written ideas that Mr. Crossett shared. I think all that just helps know how to structure the conversation so that we're talking about the things that really are points of either disagreement or just things that are important. And then, Jim, it's all public documents anyway. I did ask Phyllis to post the document that you wrote with your feedback on board docs, because I think we'll talk about it in this meeting. And that way, if anybody's watching either now or at a future time.
I printed out some copies.
There you go, great. So like we have a hard copy, and if people are watching at home or later, anything we're looking at here, you also have on board docs. I wanted to just say to you, Jim, there's so much in what you shared that I really agree with. I think specifically alignment to a good strategic plan, the need to think in terms of trends across multiple years and the ways in which there can be factors outside of the superintendent's control that are city in scope or national in scope, like, I don't know, a pandemic, that can make these things tricky. But that's not a reason not to do it. It's just a reason to be really thoughtful about how you do it. And I 100% agree. I love the 360 thoughts that you had. I like the idea of I mean, good evaluation in my experience is all about an absence of surprises. And so that you have this quarterly visibility piece. And I think the idea of, good evaluation also, I think, comes from a place of wanting to see the person win and not play gotcha. And so your piece about like, what are the actions somebody can take to get to the ultimate are all things that I just think, cosign. And there's no but at the end of this. It's just a thank you. So with some thank yous, I wanted to, Rob, can you put that Google Doc up on the screen? And if people are watching on Zoom, I'm going to ask if Rob can just paste the URL into the Zoom chat. And what I think will happen then is this should be viewable by anybody. And so if people want to follow along, we can do that. And so what I've got here in this section that says, Rob, can you scroll down to where it says working draft? Okay, and if just to do we're just going to scan through this, and we're not going to read all of it, but I just want to orient people to what's in this document. So if you scroll down, Rob, with the exception of the blue, which we'll talk about in a second, all I did is paste the language from the last version we looked at together into this Google document. And my hope is that, like, as we talk through different issues, and as this committee comes to some recommendations, we can update it in real time. And then we can just make this do what the committee wants it to do. And then if you scroll back up to the top, what I tried to do here is just capture, none of these things should be surprises because we talked about all of them at the last board meeting, but just to put this kind of queue of what are the issues that have come up in the feedback, what are the issues where there seems to be really 7 out of 7 board members agreeing, and then what are the issues where there's some disagreement. And then what I'm hoping we can do, we're not going to spend the whole meeting on this, but I think we could spend, a half hour if we need to and still have plenty of time, longer if we need it, is to work through the areas of disagreement to try to figure out what the 3 of us want to recommend to the whole board. Any questions so far about what's in here? Or anybody have a better idea for how to do this? Totally open? Okay. All right, so just to recap, where the majority of, it really shouldn't say a majority, where the full board agrees, is that, and none of this should be a surprise, this is all stuff we talked about at the last policy committee meeting and at the October 28th business meeting. Everybody likes moving the timing. That's a huge win on its own, so thank you, everybody. Everybody likes the idea of there being some collaborative goal setting. I added, Rob, if you scroll down a little bit to the first blue text, you can see there, I just added some language that I was trying to get at the collaborativeness. I think this looks good, but I'd love to hear from Kendra or Jim if you'd like to change any of that language. Nope, I'm so sorry. It's the second blue under content. Yeah. It says mutually built, close collaboration. I referenced the strategic plan, Jim, based on the feedback that you shared. I referenced multi-year trends versus single-year data. So I was trying to pull in some of the things that you were saying, but I wanted to check when we're all in a meeting together, did I hear the feedback right?
Yeah, I think, I like the idea of 3 years, but,
So if we say 3-year trends?
and it can, like a rolling 3 years even, if it's, this is for the interim superintendent?
No. This is imagine a world where we have a permanent superintendent.
Yeah, so I'd say like a rolling 3 years. Does that make sense? In other words, not 3 years at a time, but every year you're looking 3 years back.
Yeah, I think what I'm trying to do here too is there is a sweet spot between providing parameters and leaving future boards flexible enough to respond to the needs of their given year. Okay. So what I did was I just added this where possible. Yeah, and so I think it does paint a picture of what good looks like, but also leaves enough room for like if there's a pandemic or something, some other, yeah.
Sure, sure.
Kendra, were you going to
Okay,
say something?
I'm just trying to process for a second. So we're not saying, so we're still saying that over the 3 years, we're looking intermittently at how, the data is going, but over a collective period of the 3 years. Is that what we're saying here?
The way I'm interpreting this, and this is, I think, a great thing to talk about, is, you got to do an evaluation every year. But for that evaluation to have meaning, it needs to make sense in the context of where the district's been. So as you're looking at what should the goal be for this year, there could also be a goal for what happens 3 years down the road, but there needs to be some kind of milestone for the current year. It just needs to make sense in the context of what the trends have been and where the trends will likely go. And is that how you also were thinking about it?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so if that looks okay, I'd love to keep moving because there's a bunch more in here. But again, we're in the where I think there was agreement from the full board. We got timing, we got collaborative goal setting. Everybody seems to like the idea that we're in public approving goals for the year, again, in line with this new timing. And then the fourth one was the idea about there being like no surprises and like some interim conversations over the course of the year. And so that was the first blue section that I incorrectly flagged before, so that you can see the language I added there. I just wanted to check, does this get at the important part of the feedback you shared, and do you feel okay about it?
Yep.
And Kendra, any concerns?
Yes, and I also believe just in current discussion with the board as well as with the superintendent, those midpoints are very helpful, right? Because again, we want to make sure that we are trending in the right direction. And if not, we are able to, ultimately try to put some interventions in place and self-correct so that we can get on the right track. So yes.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to make this top section green just to show that we've made a little progress if you scroll up, Rob. Okay, so now we got to get through this section. And I will just say from the outset, like I'd like to find something that all three of us support. Technically you can pass a recommendation out of the committee with a majority vote, which is 2 people. But this is really important. I think you all are very smart and have good perspective on this. And so I'd like to find something that can get all 3 of us. And I'm willing to compromise to get there. So I think there was some disagreement about the percent of the evaluation that should be measurable. This is where I had a good conversation with Eve yesterday. If she's watching, wonderful. And if not, I'm going to do my best, Eve, to represent our conversation accurately. I think there has been in the past, I think a little bit of absence of total clarity, some of which is likely my responsibility, where what I was not meaning to recommend necessarily is that, if 75% of the overall rating comes from these measurable performance objectives, I wasn't necessarily saying all 75% of that needs to be about student academic outcomes. I think a big chunk of that needs to be. But I can imagine an evaluation that also cares about whether kids are getting to school on time with transportation, cares about chronic absenteeism, cares about student mental health, cares about staff morale, and there are ways to measure those things. The idea with the 75% was that 75% come from measurable targets that are agreed to in advance. And they can be aligned to, whatever that current board and superintendent in that collaborative process really believe matters most for that next year. I think somehow that became in some of these discussions, it's got to be 75% about what's on the state report card. I don't know. For my part, I would want to see a big chunk be reflective of our kids learning at the rate at which we want them to learn. But again, this comes back to that, how do we provide enough guidance for future boards without being too prescriptive so that they can't adapt to the needs of any given year. And so for my part, like, I do think there needs to be a number on here that says, like, in our policy, a certain percent of the superintendent's evaluation needs to come from things that you measure. And it needs to come from things that you measure, that you set targets a year in advance, so there are no surprises over the course of the rest of the year. And it's all public, so that the public sees what the board is holding the superintendent accountable for. So I think, I'd love to hear, Jim, what you think, or Kendra, what you think, and what that means we should do.
So just in my perspective of this, I do think that a great portion of the evaluation needs to be connected to student outcomes. And again, I agree, I don't think that the entire, evaluation will be based on that, because we do know that there are other important things that are reflective of the superintendent's, role. But we are, as a district, the superintendent's job is to move outcomes. As a board, our job is to focus on student outcomes. And so we want to ensure that our students are doing well academically and hold that expectation. And I share this perspective because I really appreciated going to the Council of Great City Schools and also having the comparison to go to OSBA. And one thing about Council of Great City Schools is that at the forefront, everything everything in terms of the work was really rooted in how are we ensuring that our students are learning. And so I think that a huge portion of it does need to connect to, okay, what are the priorities in terms of what goals we want our students to accomplish, right? And holding and having that level of accountability. So I think that it is important to set the expectation, and for the superintendent to also know that this is the expectation that the board will uphold and have for them in that position. So in terms of the percentage, I think that's something that we can work through. But again, I do think that the majority of the evaluation in large part should be connected to student outcomes.
So I agree with both of what you're saying. I think that I think there are some other things that you can measure that Ben was talking about, like attendance, and but I also think what's especially important in the quarterly reviews to measure some activities that the superintendent should be doing to help those outcomes come about. Like maybe I probably need some help on this, but like, is the superintendent holding proper meetings with the principals and working with them quarterly, or what, I think there's activities and behaviors that the superintendent needs to be doing to help those outcomes come about. And I think we need to be monitoring those. I think what I'm worried about is if we get a state report card that's not good, our community isn't just going to hold the superintendent accountable. They're going to hold us accountable.
And we should be held accountable.
Yes, and that's why I think we should need to be measuring what the superintendent is doing during the year. So when we get to the end of a year, it's not, and we get a report card, and the public's going to say, well, what was the board doing all year long? Weren't they checking this out? So I think that we have to there are ways to measure some things, activities, like the number of meetings, or did the superintendent meet with every principal, or is the superintendent, supporting professional development properly? I think those are some activities we also have to put into that 75%, not just for, to say that student outcomes aren't important and that shouldn't be the biggest chunk of what we get evaluated on, but it's to help us monitor whether or not we're going to be able to be improving or be on target. So I don't disagree with you guys. I just would like to add a few things into that 75% that maybe feel a little bit soft, but I think you can measure them so that we are actually really monitoring what the superintendent is doing, as opposed to, I don't know, that's just, and I think that's something that, the reason I highlight that is because performance reviews, if everything's good, if we have great report card and everything's going well, you tend not to dive into the details too much. But when the report card's bad, then everybody wants to look at the details of what's going on. So this is just another detail that we can have where we've been doing our job to try to support the superintendent and make things happen that are good outcomes. So I don't disagree with you. I just want to add a little more in.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I guess in terms of monitoring what the superintendent is doing, you spoke about maybe trying to identify how many meetings the superintendent is having with principals.
I mean, I don't know. I probably need a little help with those kinds of things, but I do think that there's probably smarter people on our board who would know more about how to do that. And the superintendent might even have some ideas too.
Yeah, I think that would be great to include the superintendent in that conversation. But I think in terms of the monitoring piece, I think that will be a part of the check-ins, the quarterly check-ins, or in terms of the things that you share. But I think we're also trying to process how to break this down in terms of how it will be measurable. But again, I still rest on we need to ensure that the goals and the guardrails are being upheld and that we are seeing progress for our students academically.
Thank you. I agree with things both of you were saying, and I have an idea. Can I share this? And we can do this and I do this. But on the behaviors, Jim, I agree with you. I think the things that also give me some concern are, and this will get into what needs to be done publicly. The things I've seen get real challenging with board superintendents, and this is not just about Superintendent Wright. This was also about Interim Superintendent Amat. This is also about Superintendent Mitchell. This has been true in my entire tenure on the board, is you have 7 different people with 7 different sets of ideas. And it really does make somebody's job impossible if they have to do the actions and behaviors over the course of the year that 7 different people are telling them to do, because they can point in different directions. And they can accumulate to more than is possible to do in any given executive's year. And so that's the power, I think, of needing to vote on these things in public. Because what it does is it clarifies for the superintendent, what is the board saying as opposed to a board member saying. So I'm all on board for a version of this so long as it's done in public with a vote behind it, so that we can get kind of clarity as opposed to
And it'd be part of the collaborative discussion.
100%.
Yeah.
Other thing too is I think and you even said this, I think we're gonna hire a superintendent, and this is not a comment on our current interim, this is just a general comment. Ideally, you wanna hire a superintendent who has a really strong set of ideas about what those activities and behaviors are. Because I think we have a lot of expertise, but I don't think any of us have been a principal. None of us have ever worked, I worked for a minute as an administrator in a central office, but I don't think anybody else has. Several of us have been teachers, but there's a great financial background, but I think, so anyway, so where that points me. I just really agree with what you said, Kendra, about the need to keep student outcomes at the center. And student academic learning at the center. What it makes me want to do is what if we took that 75% number and what if we lowered it to something like 60? And then also created some language in there that highlighted the importance of doing the kinds of, I'm going to call them leading indicators, work that Jim was suggesting. And what I think that would do is it would give boards the space to make these kinds of decisions year over year. It would also make sure that we are keeping measurable, and I think, to use the council language, you're talking about outcomes, and Jim's talking about inputs, and we really want to make sure that we're holding the superintendent accountable for outcomes. The only way you get there is with the right inputs. And your great point about if the report card's bad, they're going to ask us what we were doing all year. I think that's totally reasonable. And so
but the inputs come from the recommendation of the superintendent.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, I think that it should be there, but they ultimately will determine how they will be able to accomplish these outcomes or these expectations that we are having for them.
So can you scroll down, Rob, to the part where it says Part 2 content? Because we're going to write something, then I'm going to try to make sure it does what everybody is discussing. And can you make that just a little bit bigger? You're doing it already. That's great. So current draft said, each year the board will approve measurable performance objectives, skipping down. At a minimum, these objectives will include measures of system-wide academic and financial performance. They will include goals that focus on improving opportunities for students of color and low-income students. We're going to come back to that in a second. These performance objectives shall be the basis for at least, and I'm changing this from 75 to 60. And then I'm going to add the sentence that says, it is during the goal-setting process and throughout the year during interim check-ins, the board and the superintendent should align on the most important, what was your language, Jim? Like actions and
Activities and behaviors, I think.
activities and behaviors that will lead to the performance objectives. I'm trying to leave room for boards to do exactly what you're describing and also be responsive,
Right.
keep it measurable. It's majority outcome driven. People feel okay with this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but let's see.
I'm pulling in my, go ahead, sorry.
So these performance objectives should be based at least 60% of the overall rating. Does that need to say performance outcomes?
This language here used performance objectives. I can change it objectives to outcomes. It's not, I have zero strong preference about this.
I don't care either. It's the same thing.
Same thing.
Okay, that's fine. Objectives is fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, can I make this green? If we scroll back up to the top, Rob, the percent of evaluation that should be measurable?
Can we go back down? I just want to call
Yeah.
out language. And I know it's reflective in our goals and guardrails, but the language around improving opportunities for students of color and low-income students. Can we have, I mean, I know that this is for future boards, but as well, but can we actually call out our Black and our Hispanic student demographic and add students of color? I mean, because that is the population of students that we serve.
I'm adding it right now. African-American students, Latinx students, and students of color.
Yes.
I'm gonna say students of color and low-income students. We like this?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay, so I do not want to rush if there's still important stuff to talk about. If we do feel at a 3-0 on this, I do want to move forward. Yeah, Jim?
I think the interim check-ins, I see, okay. Okay. So the interim check-ins are sort of within this 60%, is the way you've written that.
Can you point to me the language that you're referencing?
So you're saying 60% is based on performance objectives. During the goal-setting process, we'll have interim check-ins. I'm wondering if those interim check-ins need a percent, like 10%. In other words, if you're the superintendent, I've got to do these, I got to be prepared for these interim check-ins
Yeah.
because it's going to count on my review. I think so that might, I think it can't be,
Yeah,
I can
I
just
agree
mail
with
in
you,
the
yeah.
check-in because it doesn't really count. Make it
Yeah.
count
What
for
weight
something.
would we attribute there? Yeah. Yeah.
Like maybe 10% of the review would be making sure they show up and do a good job for these check-ins.
I mean, I think it's worth putting there, and we can present it to the full board, and they can, you know,
But that
share their
puts- that puts
perspective,
some
yeah.
That puts some teeth in that.
Yeah.
A little bit.
I'm thinking. Like that?
Yep, perfect.
The question I was asking myself in my head was, is this an area where we want to leave it open for future boards? And I think from my perspective, so long as the interim check-in is tied to what those goals were that were approved at the beginning of the year and not on some other stuff, cool. And the only thing I worry about is like, there is a point at which there's so much work done to prepare for something like that, that the opportunity cost of that prep gets high enough that there's stuff that's not happening. But like, we don't specify, like, I don't know, like, let's leave that to future boards to figure out like what is the right cadence, you know? An interim might mean every trimester. It might mean like somebody, superintendent's been there for a while and is doing really well, might mean mid-year, you know, like, but future boards can figure out like, and so that's what led me to think that this is.
That's fine.
Okay. Okay, great. So we actually took care of several of these. So if you go back to the top, Rob, thank you for your help. I'm going to make the percent that should be measurable green. I'm going to make the subgroup, this was, we just talked about this, Kendra, with your language change. So I'm going to make the subgroup targets green, if that's all right. This is like, we have language in here that says part of the goals should include outcomes that specify African-American students, Latinx students, students of color, and low-income students. We're not saying that needs to be blank percent, or it like needs to be this kind of measure, but we're saying it's got to be in there. And then, okay, great. Okay, on board surveys and use of 360, one of the reasons I like this 60% number is it gives the board another 40% to figure out what to do with. So it could include the 360, it could include the board survey.
We're down to 30% now, because we took 10% for the.
We've got 30% to play with. They could use that for this, they could use that for the other thing, but it's not like there's room, you know, like, and it's still more than there was in the first draft, because it was going to be just 25%.
Right.
Okay, so can I make these green?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about my 360 idea.
Yeah, please.
Which was you know, originally I thought about 360, you could survey all the teachers and principals, but I really think it should be just teachers and principals, because they have the most impact on student outcomes. But I also had this idea of let the superintendent pick some people, let the board pick some people, and it's a smaller group, but it would maybe make collecting the data much more doable and not so unwieldy if you just open it up to everybody. And that was my idea, that, you know, would be maybe 40 unique individuals, teachers and principals. I think that's what I came up with. Yeah, 40 people. And some of them are going to be, if the superintendent picks people, then obviously she's going to get some good reviews. But we might also get feedback from those people as to why things are going well. And then 20 that we would pick. So that's just my idea, to make it somewhat manageable and not just a giant survey where we're herding cats and all that kind of stuff. So it's just an idea.
Yeah.
And this is not a unique idea. Lots of institutions do this.
Yeah.
They really,
Yeah, I mean, hospitals do this kind of stuff all the time.
So
that's great.
I think, thank you for sharing this. My only thought about it is, I guess, how do you manage the objectivity in terms of the information that's shared, right? From these people that are selected to be surveyed.
Yeah, but the main reason I wanted to do a 360 wasn't necessarily to get specific feedback for improvement. I just wanted to get the temperature of things so that, you know, if it looks like there's a vote of no confidence coming, we're not surprised. That's mostly what I was thinking about with the 360. And only because we had this vote of no confidence, which is rare, happened before, and I just thought, well, we got to have our finger on the pulse of things a little bit. How's it going? That was kind of my idea with the 360. It wasn't necessarily, necessarily going to be a giant influence on, how things, because we're going to be monitoring, we meet with the superintendent all the time, et cetera. It was more just to,
Yeah, and I agree with that, right, to get a gauge of how the superintendent is, performing and just to give feedback. But I guess I'm still having challenges with processing whether the feedback will still be objective feedback, right? Or like, if the superintendent is able to pick 10 principals, what will stop the superintendent from picking the 10 principals that they know will give really good feedback? Like, how do we, I guess my question is, how do we navigate through that process where we're getting,
I think it's just subjective feedback, and we just read it and take it for what it's
Yeah.
worth.
Can I make a suggestion?
Yeah.
I
don't know.
because I happen to like the idea of trying this. I have a hunch that it will lead to the outcome that Kendra is describing, which is that they will offset one another.
Yeah.
And every year you do this, you will get a bunch of, it's too negative, but like, here's my thought, or the suggestion was going to be, let's write this, we don't have to do this, but my suggestion would be, let's write this in a way that lets the board do this, and let's do this. Like whenever we have a next superintendent, and whenever we do that superintendent, let's do it, and then if it is really incredibly helpful, let's add it to the policy. I think because we've never tried it before,
Yeah.
it's actually really helpful to hear that hospitals do it.
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's so complicated, right? Because, you referenced the vote of no confidence from the spring. We were given the Panorama survey to all the teachers, to all the administrators, and the results were improving. And there was a vote of no confidence at the same time. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. I'm just saying both of those things happened in the spring. And so it's tricky to figure out like what is signal and what is noise. Or noise is not right, but like what is representative versus what is like the opposite,
Well, one thing, if the superintendent can't find 10 principals that are friendly, then
That's a problem.
we'll know some really good information.
I think that's a great point. I think it's great. But I think it's important. I'd like to see us try this, and I don't want you to feel like we're squashing the idea. But would you be open to like we leave space for it, we do it if we like it, or we learn something, we add it?
Absolutely, sure,
Okay.
sure.
So is there language here we should change just to make sure that this is reflected? I mean, as I read it currently, because we have 70% spoken for between the performance objectives at the end of the year and the work that goes into the interim measures, there's nothing that prevents our board from doing exactly what this is as it's currently written. But I just wanted to, we can also change it if
So you're
that's,
just going to say use 360, but
does it say
do you
360
want to
in here?
delineate, we're going to do a trial attempt with, some process, the process that I described?
I think we could say when we present this policy that this leaves almost a third of the evaluation for things that could come from some kind of 360, could come from superintendent standards that are given through a board survey like we've done in the past, could do both of those things. And this committee, we could make it like I don't want to speak for Kendra, but at least Ben and Jim are recommending that here's what we try for this in this upcoming year.
Okay.
can you all give me, and I have my idea of a 360, but can you give, I guess, more detail about what that 360 model entails?
Well, you saw my document where they each pick people, and I guess I would leave it fairly open-ended, maybe just a couple of general questions for each of those people to ask, to ask each of those people, like, how's it going? Give them a chance to give a grade. Is it, 5? Is it a 4? And then comments. Here, are there any comments for improvement and comments for what's going right? And just kind of leave it open-ended. And it would be fairly subjective information. It wouldn't be a big, extensive review, just a few questions and a rating. And then we can synthesize that into, getting a feel for how things are going.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah.
What came to mind is, I know we had previous discussion around some of the state standards, and I'm curious to know if that's a place where you thought that maybe some of those type of, you
Yeah,
know.
we could use some of those.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
I think also, just to, I'm not, this doesn't change my position, is just to note something again. Anything that's written down will be in the newspaper. So let's say you survey 10 people and 9 of the comments are positive and 1 of them is incredibly negative. The newspaper or the TV station will lead with the most negative comment.
Yeah.
And so I've just seen that become a challenge. And I think that it might be, and it's still really important to do. And the board and the superintendent's got to lead from what the major themes are, not from what like the most negative comments are. And that's what good leadership looks like. But I just want people to be ready for that. And that's another reason why I think it's worth trying it, because I think we'll learn some things and then we can,
Sure. But I also think that you make a good point. The 40 people that get selected have to know their comments are going to be public too.
and put their names on them.
And that, please?
And that they put their names on them.
Yeah, but that will also enable the responses to be constructive.
Yeah, okay. I can live with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We might not get anybody to sign up.
Which is itself data, right? Like, I mean, like that itself, I think, is important information. But so just to go back to the language, because what my goal for today is to be able to recommend something out of the committee with all 3 votes. Jim, I think the current version allows us to do all of these things, and you're okay with the language as is? Okay. All right, I'm making that green. Okay, we're going to get all this done, and we're going to tackle the other stuff too. Okay, so there was agreement from everybody that setting the goals in public needs to happen in a public board meeting. There was not agreement on 2 other things that my draft suggested happen in public. One is that you vote on the scoring methodology in advance. I don't want that to sound overly wonky, but if you imagine, let's say a next superintendent, 60% of their evaluation is going to come from these performance objectives. We vote on them at the beginning of the year. They include a mix of student academic outcomes, transportation, attendance, staff morale. We've got 6 measures on there. What happens if 3 of them are good and 3 of them are bad? Or like they hit the target on 3, they miss the target on 3. They really exceed the target by a wide margin on 2 and barely miss the target on the other 4. My strong recommendation is the board has to decide in advance and in public how it's going to resolve those kinds of things so that it is not subjective or reactive later on. And I'm not saying that there needs to be one rule versus another rule. I'm just saying the board needs to be clear about it. Because I think that helps the superintendent know what to prioritize. And it also helps to, you can just imagine a world where like, let's say that the superintendent, there's 6 goals. Superintendent totally crushed the first one and came within 0.1 percentage points of the other 4, or the other 5. And so one board member says, well, you missed 5 of your 6 performance targets. This is a terrible evaluation. And one says, like you just see all the scenarios. And so the worst possible time to make those decisions is after it's all already happened. And so again, this is not saying, here's what the methodology should be. It's leaving that to future boards to figure out. But it's saying you should figure out, you should be public about it, and it shouldn't be a surprise.
Sure, and this methodology would incorporate that 3-year view.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great.
Incorporate the trends.
Can I add that, Jim?
Yeah.
So, Rob, will you scroll down to where it says Part 3 scoring? It says when the board approves the annual performance objectives, it will method blah 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 blah. And I say wherever possible, that methodology will incorporate the important context from prior year trends.
Yeah, that's fine.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's a good add.
Because
So
that'll go into the goal setting anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's good to remember that.
Like if something has been going down for 4 years in a row,
Yeah.
and it goes up in this year, but doesn't quite go up as much as what the target is, gosh, that feels like a real win, you know? And why not have that as part of what the methodology says?
Right.
Okay, any questions about this? All right, any disagreement?
No, but do we, okay, so we'll have to define the methodology at some point.
Yeah, and I feel very strongly, I'm open to pushback on this, but I think that's a great thing for future boards to do.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
in every year,
Discretion.
like, that you have, because
Give them a chance to emphasize something more or less, something.
to learn and get
Yeah,
better over time. Like, I can also see this thing becoming so unwieldy that it's a mess, you know, and then it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
doing anything, you know, and so like, how do we keep
Yeah.
it reasonably?
Yeah, I agree with allowing the future boards to decide, again, because it will have that conversation with the actual superintendent as well. So just leaving it at
Yeah.
that discretionary point, I think would be good.
Okay, sounds good.
We're okay? All right, so then keep it moving. Then there also was disagreement about whether so a couple of board members wanted the final evaluation to be something that only happens in executive session, as opposed to some kind of final document or something that gets voted on in public. My argument for why I think this needs to be done in public goes back to what I was bringing up to you, Jim, about the actions and behaviors piece. That you can, if you have 7 different board members, you can have 7 totally different opinions about what the final evaluation of the superintendent actually is. And I think that that's a challenge because it's hard to create real clarity. And so I feel strongly that there be something that gets voted on. It doesn't mean that board members couldn't share feedback in executive session. I think that's totally appropriate. But, you know, is this evaluation a satisfactory one or an unsatisfactory one? That's a binary question. If you voted on the scoring methodology in advance, you know, I also don't think there's a lot to debate around that.
Right. If we do the scoring methodology in advance, then there shouldn't be 7 different opinions. That should eliminate that.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
So,
That might be a long discussion, the methodology, but get
it's so important.
Get the
Yeah.
hard work done first.
That's exactly, I agree 100%.
I agree with having the discussion in terms of the feedback in like executive session, and having the vote, whether satisfactory or not satisfactory in public. But I guess my only thought or concern is still trying to honor the superintendent at the same time. You know what I mean? In terms of just how do we do it with, I guess, integrity and fidelity? Like still have that accountability piece there for everyone, but I'm just processing or trying to think about how do we still do that where again, it's not that we're out to get you type of thing, but we're trying to, I guess, be considerate at the same time of not like publicly humiliating, I guess.
So what if we do, I hear that, and I think that makes sense. I think what I'm trying to solve for is clarity and alignment, and I think there ought to be a way of doing both of those things. So we could, like the current version, Rob, if you go down to where it says timeline, and this is in the very first paragraph, it's, part 1. So the current version reads, complete the eval by first week in October. As part of that process, the board votes in a public meeting to approve a written copy of that evaluation by the same date. We could strike that sentence. And we could say that if we go down, like, we could add a paragraph in the scoring section that says the board will provide the superintendent with a written copy of the final evaluation that applies the scoring methodology approved at the beginning of the year. Like what that would do is it would solve for my clarity concern. It would protect, I think it would honor what you're saying. I mean, it would mean, it's at the end of the day, it's kind of be a moot question because that can be FOIA'd. You know, like if there's a written document, then it'll wind up in the newspaper anyway. But I think, you know, it also shouldn't be a surprise because we voted on the stuff ahead of time.
I think the evaluation, and I don't know how you want to write this in here, but I think the evaluation needs to include, and maybe it will already because of the agreement on the methodology, but it needs to include feedback that's constructive. And I think the word constructive is going to be important because that gets to what you were talking about. And also, if it's a situation where the superintendent the performance is really bad, and we still need to provide that constructive feedback, because if that superintendent decides to leave or is asked to leave, the next person coming in needs that constructive feedback to know where the weaknesses in the district are. So I think that the public document needs to be something that is helpful for improvement of the whole district.
I can go with that.
I don't, you wordsmith that now.
Well, like I think,
Kendra liked it, you got to write it in there.
yeah, this is what work in progress looks like here. So I think I'm grateful for it. So what if we do this? I'm going to strike this sentence that's at the public vote piece, and I'm going to put down here in the scoring section something that says, by the end of the first week in October, the board will provide the superintendent with a written copy of the final evaluation, which utilizes the scoring methodology approved the prior fall. The board will also share with the superintendent what was your language, Jim?
Constructive feedback.
Constructive feedback.
On how about strengths to leverage and opportunities for growth. Is that okay? Okay. Not to hide the ball, like I am writing it this way on purpose, and in the second sentence, it does not say in writing.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying that is because of the same reason it's the press thing. Like I think like the story will only talk about, like if there could be 6 positive things and 1 negative thing, and the news story would say superintendent accused of blah, 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 because it'll get more clicks. Like it's not because I think these are bad people, but like I think just the incentives are wrong. And so I think that what I'm trying to do is create something here that gets the best things of the work and solves for as many of the risks as we can. Council, we haven't really asked you anything in the last half hour. Are we breaking any rules, or like have we violated any laws? Or?
That's what we should defer to for sure.
Great. All right, just checking. Okay, are we good then? If we scroll up, Rob, can I make this part green?
Yeah.
We're okay, Kendra? Look at all this progress. Okay, so we got 20 minutes in our meeting left. Let me just ask Kendra, on the audit policy for the community engagement, how long would you like for that?
Oh, it's not long at all. I just, I really want to connect with general counsel and just kind of get clarity on that, because I know that the audit charter is on there, so maybe about 5 to 8 minutes. It shouldn't be long at all, probably less than that.
Okay, so why don't we aim to be done with the eval by like 10:52? Gives us 12 more minutes to try to, maybe we can finish early, but like we can get through the rest of this and then still have some time for that. I want to make sure we do Eves. I think Eves will take all of 2 minutes because it's a request for council to go prepare something for us for a future meeting. Is that an okay way of managing the time for everybody? We forgetting anything important? Oh, hearing of the public. That's important. Okay.
Okay, and just correct me if I'm wrong, are we discussing the facilities use?
And the facilities use. See, this is why we make a good team. Okay, let's try to finish the eval stuff in 5 minutes. I think Jim, was there anything in your suggestions document that we haven't covered?
I think we're good.
Okay, let's talk then for just 5 minutes about the infrequent scenarios piece. Like at the end of the day, if what it takes to get this thing done is dropping this section, like, let's drop the section and get this done, because I think what we've got is good, and I'd rather see something good happen than something perfect not happen. My motivation for writing the infrequent scenarios is that, like, I've just seen examples over the last 5 years of sometimes our board doesn't always follow all of our own policies. And it's sometimes it's not out of ill will, you know? Sometimes I think people just don't know about something, or we find out about something later, you know? And I can imagine a world where a board just doesn't approve the goals on time. And so you wind up in the middle of the year without goals for the superintendent. Or I can imagine one where they just never do the scoring methodology for the prior year. You rip from the headlines, you know, like a superintendent starts in the middle of the year. What do you do? You know, I think so I wrote up what I wrote up was a series of default rules where, like, if the board chooses not to take action, policy sets up what's going to happen in its place. I like that. I think it is healthy. Like, I'm not so tied to, like, the thing that I feel strongly about is that there be default rules. I feel less strongly about what the default rules are. And so I'd love just feedback from, you know, you two. Like, should we push forward on this section? Should we drop this section? What do you all think?
Rob, can you scroll down to the infrequent scenarios? I really want to ask General Counsel their thoughts on this. I mean, I like it just because I'm a process person. And so, you know, in the event something doesn't happen, then what's the default thing in place, right? So I appreciate the language there, but in terms of policy, I do want to just get feedback from General Counsel in terms of, like, what their thoughts are. I'm seeing this listed.
Well, I think it's optimistic to say that it will be infrequent. In my time, in my time at CPS, the board has never followed its timeline for setting goals for the superintendent. And during that time, while it hasn't been in board policy, the superintendent's contract has always included a timeline for when goals will be set. And this
That
is
is
not
such
just-
an indictment of us.
I mean,
Like, and I take responsibility for that too, but come on, like, how can we expect other people to focus and get their act together when we can't do that?
yeah, I
So
mean,
where we are in terms of the interim evaluation, right? It was written in contract, however, we didn't establish the goals by the deadline.
yeah, I mean, I remember, and back before anybody was on the board, this isn't an indictment of
Yeah,
the current
yeah.
board. It was very important to Superintendent Mitchell when she was here, to a point where she made it something she demanded to have in her contract, and it's the nature of the structure of the board, 7 people, it's very difficult. So I guess my reaction is, I don't think it's as infrequent as perhaps.
Just strike infrequent and make it annual, and then we've solved all the problems and we can move on.
Could the fallback be the contract?
Again, it's been included in every superintendent contract, I believe, back to Ronan, that there's a timeline for setting goals. So I think the notion that you're going to have a default rule you should take seriously, because it's very possible that the board will not get to setting those goals on time.
So this is a way to really continue to hold us all
if that's
accountable
what-
in this
yeah.
process. Okay.
Can I make this suggestion then? I think Dan's comment has changed as I size the importance of this, it's gone from like a 2 to a 10. We will not be able to do that well in the time we have in this meeting. Can I make this recommendation? Like, I'm worried about the end of the year, and I'm worried about new committees and things next year. I would like to see this done before the year is over. What I would like to recommend is that we break it in 2 parts. And we make a recommendation for approval to the board that is everything in here except the infrequent scenario section. And then we tackle this in our December policy committee meeting. And if we can find a way to get to something the three of us support, let's do it. And if we can't, we've already made some big progress, and I hate to see that thrown out the window just because the year's going to change.
Sounds great.
Okay, so we will continue that next time. And just to be really clear, so what we've got here is this language. I will share this very same link with, or Dan, you have it because it's in the chat, I guess. That's what will go into the policy for recommendation. And can we just, Phil, let's think through timing for a second. When is the next business meeting?
18th, November 18th.
Monday.
It's Monday. And our next board meeting after that is not until December 9th, which is the last board meeting for the year. So I would like very much to get this out and on the agenda for Monday's meeting, and we can still do that because today is Wednesday. It's a much tighter turnaround than we normally have.
Okay, we can get it ready. For passage or for consideration?
I think for passage,
Okay, sorry, with part 4 or without?
without part 4.
Got it.
And I want to make sure that this doesn't feel, this is why I'm so focused on the end of the year, like we don't have a lot of meetings left. I think this has been a really good discussion, but I want this to get, we've brought it to the board, we've gotten people's feedback at multiple points. I want to put it forward, though, as it's got support from all three of us. And I want to just confirm that people feel okay with what we're doing.
Yeah, what I will say, though, is this may be one that we have to set apart from the
100%.
consent agenda.
100%, yes, not as part of the consent agenda. Yeah.
So the working draft that is currently in this Google Doc from part 1, part 2, part 3, incorporated into a board policy format and with a resolution for approval.
That's correct.
No problem.
Thank you, everybody. And look, we got 12 minutes left. Okay, so let's keep banging away here. Kendra, on audit policy?
So I recall bringing up, just wondering if we had an audit or if we've done an audit in terms of, like our community engagement process. And so I know that the audit charter is on board docs for this, so I just really wanted to just process with general counsel. So it's highlighting how the audit committee was, I guess, started, or the role of the audit committee, but I guess how does that work in terms of, or in relation to the community engagement process? Is what I was really trying to hone in on was more specifically about what our community engagement process entailed and how effective and efficient that has been, and if we've done any audits around that. Does that make sense what I'm?
Maybe. So there's two, you're talking about the audit committee charter, that's a board policy?
So I know as it related to the agenda, the audit committee charter was listed, and then it said community engagement. I'm speaking specifically around if there's been an audit on the community engagement process, and what were those findings, or if that's something that the audit committee does, not so much as it relates to the audit committee charter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think the audit committee generally focuses more on financial issues. They are delving into a little bit more into school operations. I don't think they've ever done anything on community engagement. But are you talking about trying to understand how well the district is doing with community
Yes.
engagement? I'm not sure that's even the audit committee should do that. I mean, that's almost like hiring a marketing consultant or something to get a feel for that, I think. I don't think they'd have the expertise to do that.
Okay.
I defer to a former audit
Yeah.
committee
Yeah.
member.
Yeah,
So
the audit committee members are mostly, we're accountants. So I think to understand how we're doing with community engagement, probably we'd need to get someone with a different type of expertise. I don't think it would be, it would probably be a not very strong endeavor for the audit committee. I don't think they'd be strong at measuring that.
Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly with you, so that's where my confusion lied
Yeah.
in terms of this
Yeah.
policy being listed or connected to that, and so I was speaking to something completely different. So I know that we have done audits in the schools as it pertains to like the dress and grooming policy, but have we done any type of audits, not necessarily related to the audit committee, but any audits pertaining to our overall process with community engagement and its efficiency or areas of improvement. And so that's what I was trying to target in
You're
terms of
talking
my.
about almost like a survey of how well we're, not even an audit, but maybe
Yeah.
a survey, right?
To some extent, yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, and just monitoring that regularly in terms of our effectiveness as it pertains to community engagement.
Yeah, you're talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart since I've joined the board, I'm trying to get my brain around the whole topic. But we are in a competitive environment. The state of Ohio set us up to be competitors. And we compete with charter schools, parochial schools, private schools. And as a business guy, when you're competitive, you want to get information that's called market intelligence or community, or a feel for community engagement. And I think that's an area where we could invest some money as a district to get a better sense of all that and understand where we have weaknesses we are in a competitive landscape. And
Yeah.
so we don't really operate necessarily with our marketing team and our, what's the group that, Karen Robertson, what is it?
Communications
Yeah.
and, yeah.
Communications marketing. I think, just looking at us as an institution, that's something we could probably do a lot better on. And that gets to this audit of community engagement, would
Yeah.
be part of that, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, we do have a stand-in policy that focuses specifically on community engagement. And so wanted to make sure that we are ensuring the equity of that and that we're honoring that policy as well. And so, but I like what you're presenting, so maybe we can touch
Yeah.
bases and discuss that a little
Maybe
bit
that's a
further.
policy that
Yeah.
needs to be revised or something.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so yeah, that concludes my piece on the community engagement.
That's two things Kendra liked that from me today. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's usually like
Jim,
17.
we
Jim,
collaborate
what's
well.
wrong? Jeez. Okay, so we've done everything in 3A. On 3B, we talked about Kareem's request. She said she would get back to us for Roman 1 and 2 for Eve. So for council, what she told me, we talked yesterday, and what she wants is as we are preparing to go into a year where we're doing contract negotiations with our collective bargaining units, can you prepare a list of any conflicts that exist between CBAs and board policy? And the answer may be there are none.
Well,
But
we try very hard to make sure there are none. I mean, generally, if there's board policy, we have to follow that.
Yeah.
And if we commit to something in a collective bargaining agreement, we have to follow that. So part of our role.
conflicts are bad.
Yeah. If there's something that a board member has in mind specifically, we're glad to look at. And of course, as we go through negotiations, we will bring to the board anything we feel could become a conflict or is
Yeah.
a conflict, but
I think she's thinking Eve, I hope you're either watching this live or you will watch this later, but I think what she was asking about is as we enter the contract.
Sure.
Should we have anything on our radar as falling in this category of conflicts we should resolve? Answer maybe nothing. It didn't sound like she had a particular thing in mind.
yeah, okay. I would be glad to follow up with her also.
Would you?
just
That would
in
be great.
case.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And again, as we negotiate, this is a negotiation year. If there's anything that becomes a potential conflict, it will definitely be brought to policy committee.
And then the last thing was whether there was just any unfinished work from last year in the bylaw review that Mike did with the policy committee last calendar year. I don't remember. I remember they spent a lot of time on it. I remember that there were a bunch of ideas thrown in the pot. Some got accepted, some didn't. I didn't remember that there was like a list of things they didn't get to, but I guess could be wrong.
I don't think so either. That was as comprehensive a review that we've done of board bylaws since I've been
ever.
here. Yeah.
Okay.
There are still some, not conflicts, but there are principles within those that run up against each other sometimes.
I think
would
that
say.
my memory of this wasn't that those things didn't get discussed. It was
That's
that we
my-
got as far as we could.
That's-
and that
that's
this is where that
absolutely my
was.
impression as
Okay.
well, yes.
Okay, great. So I think that's when I checked with her yesterday to make sure I had these right. I think we're in good shape, which I think means we have facilities and hearing of the public. So if we could maybe pull up the facilities piece here.
It's 7510.
Great. And Rob, when you get a sec, if you'd pull up the facilities piece.
It's also on board docs right now, Rob.
I think this came up in the context of, we had some concerns from some constituents about an incident at one of the Pee Wee football games, I think was the origin story for how this got on here, right? As I read this, it looks really strong to me, like but so this is, if I'm reading this right, like anybody who's renting our facilities, unless our facilities director waived this requirement, should have general liability coverage for $1 million.
Correct.
So if a school is concerned that there's damage that's been done to school facilities or litter that needs to get picked up, that like what's recourse for a school community that is frustrated with the state of facilities after use?
So that's right. There's the liability insurance requirement. There's also, I think, a really important note here. An event-specific security and safety plan may be required up to 30 days in advance, and regularly is. If there is concern about the security at an event, we can and have demanded on-site security that is a part of the event. That could be off-duty police, it could be our folks working overtime, but a requirement that be accounted for ahead of time. You know, I mean, when there's a problem in terms of the facility not being left in good condition, we can and have terminated folks' ability to use the facility. So this policy is regularly reviewed by the board, I would say once every 2 years or so. It's not a policy that has languished in any way.
Yeah. One of the things that did come up in our work session, and I brought this up, I think the policy is great, but we wanted to ensure that there was equitable access to the community to be able to utilize our buildings, right? Because it goes along with that community learning model. And so while it's written in policy, we talked about there's challenges in terms of actual community members being able to acquire and use our facilities. So I don't know if that's something that needs to be discussed on a procedural administrative level, or if that needs to be clearly written in here in terms of how the community will be able to access across the board the use of our facilities.
So just to respond, I think that's a hallmark of this policy, and written in, it's just a quote from it: the school buildings and grounds are to serve the organized educational program in the district. Historically, the Board of Education has encouraged the use of the district's facilities to the fullest extent possible, compatible with school purposes. In every school community, there are educational, cultural, recreational, and civic activities that meet the criteria of educational compatibility and supplement the regular school program. So the advice or counsel given to our schools is that our facilities should be used and able to be used by the community to the fullest extent possible. I know there are times when the board gets feedback from the community that those facilities were not made available in the time or manner that they were requested. Most times, I think that's because there was some conflicting reason that the school could or did not give access, whether that was a school event or that's a group that lost the privilege for some reason. That happens as well. So I know the board gets feedback on
I'm gonna speak differently,
Yeah.
just in knowing that there's instances where it
I
was
hear you.
none of those two, but, so again, how do we, because we want to bring in our community, we want to, I think that's a strong way for engagement, and so I guess I'm just still looking for, maybe on a procedural level, for us to ensure that we are upholding the language in this policy.
Yeah, I mean, the other area the procedures for this policy, implementing this policy, are all on the website as well. So if you go to the use of facilities page, it incorporates the application process. I mean, I've gone in there before and done tests to see, you know, how quickly are people getting back to us. It sets forth the fees. There's a differing fee schedule, so it's It's free for use, of course, but for our own activities. It's at cost. In other words, only the costs we incur if it's a group that is supporting our students, partnering with CPS, et cetera, then it's just the additional costs we incur, whether that's custodial or security or whatever. And then there's a fee schedule, which, I mean, you can look at, I think is very reasonable in terms of when it's a group unconnected to CPS asking to use the facility. So encourage you to continue giving us feedback because we do. I mean, we call principals and say, hey, what's the story here? This group is asking to use the facility. I think in our district, new principals learn pretty quickly that that's an area where if they're not making the facility available, they'll get some negative feedback from the community. So again, yeah.
Okay, thank you. The only other additional thing, and this may be a standalone policy, but, I know being at OSBA this past weekend, one of the areas of discussion was around House Bill 47, which entails the automated external defibrillators, so the AEDs, making sure that those are available for different school or community events, and we have to extend that to recreational organizations as well as community organizations that are coming on site for any type of activity, and then also making sure that our personnel is trained in like the CPR as well as how to use that. So I don't know if that's a part of that safety plan and if that should be included in this policy or if that becomes a standalone policy that we would need to address.
I think we do. Oh, well,
8452.
84, go
It
ahead.
might need to be updated. I mean, it hasn't been reviewed. We do have an AED policy currently,
Okay.
so we'll have to check it against this new law and language to see if it needs to be updated. But we do have that currently included
Okay.
in our policy.
And then Steve Knappich, who's our environmental health and safety manager, he is responsible for our AEDs. He changes batteries, he updates the system. He is our AED guy, has worked very closely with Josh Harden as well in athletics. So they were aware and on top of compliance of that new AED requirement.
Okay, perfect.
Does that get you questions answered? Anything from you, Jim? Good, okay, thank you, counsel's office. I should have done this a little bit earlier and I apologize, but Rob, would you give the hearing of the public instructions if you're online?
Yes, if you'd like to speak during the speaking in public session, which will be coming up here shortly, please click the hand icon. We will invite you over, ask you your name and association to the district, and you'll have 2 minutes to speak. Thank you.
And then do we have anybody in person who would like to speak today? We have no in-person speakers. Give people a second online. And Rob, whenever you feel like people have had enough time to do what they need to do, you can let us know who we have. So Rob is giving me the thumbs up that the time has been given, and it sounds like we have no speakers who have signed up online. It's totally fine. Last call? Okay, am I missing anything? Jim, Kendra?